I took part quite recently in a rather remarkable event, and I want to tell you all about it in this video, which has been sponsored by the Great Courses Plus, but more of that later. Now, it took place in the modern state of the Czech Republic, but it was set in 1918 in Siberia. And you have to first understand what was going on. Well, a lot of Czechs had volunteered to fight for the Russians in World War I, and this was going along fine, except that then in 1917 the Russians went and had a revolution. And then suddenly these Czech legions, as they became known, were surrounded on all sides by Reds and Whites fighting each other, and there was still the enemy, the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There was still them that possibly were a danger as well. They were surrounded by enemies on all fronts. Everyone was insisting that they joined them, and it was a bit of a confusing political situation. They decided to just get out of there, and it was rather difficult to get out of there. Now, if you want to know more about the historical setting, then I've made another video about just that, and not my participation in this event. And there will be a link here once that other video is published. Or it could be, I don't know as I say this to you now, which of the two will be published first. So it could be that it's already got a link there, which is great. Anyway, so that's the other video. This one, though, is about the event that I personally took part in and what I feel that I learned from it. And I definitely did learn a number of things from it. And I'm going to stand over here quite a lot, so that there's a lot of room for some nice pretty pictures. So here are some pretty pictures of me taking part in the event, and I'll put up more stuff there as we go along, so I'll leave room. Now, I described it as a dramatic reenactment, and it was a reenactment. I mean, what we were doing was reenacting. We were dressing up, carrying the kit of the time, and acting out what they did at the time of a real historical event. So that's reenactment, right? I also said it was dramatic, and it definitely was dramatic. It was dramatic in a number of ways. It was also it was a created drama in that it was, if you like, pre-scripted out. We were all cast in roles. We didn't create our characters like role players tend to. We were given a role. We were told what our name was, what our background was, what our relationship with various other characters were. And scene by scene, we were told broadly what to do. We didn't have dialogue to learn. It wasn't a scripted play in that sense. It described itself as a live action role play, a LARP. And yes, it was a LARP, but it was a LARP of a style unfamiliar to me, this very prescribed LARP. It refers to itself, slightly confusingly, as content. I think that's content, not content LARP. I definitely wouldn't describe this as a content LARP, because this dramatic reenactment was pretty grim. Although I'm not making that a criticism, it was meant to be grim. I knew before getting involved it was going to be grim, and it was grim. In fact, when I was filling in my form to take part, it said some of the characters have quite dark stories. How dark can we be with your character? And I wrote something along the lines of, bring it on. And they brought it on. It's difficult to think how my character's experiences could have been much darker, frankly. But anyway, I've been told not to fill this with spoilers because it's not a transparent event. When you take part, you know whom you're going to be playing, and you know their background. You know a little bit about some of the other characters, but you're not supposed to know everything that takes place. So I don't want to spoil this for anyone, so I'm not going to be giving you any details of what happened to me, just talking in broad themes. It's 1918 and we are all Czechs. We have to know how to address each other, so we need to be taught how to say each other's names. This is one of the hardest things, actually. I don't think anyone had an easy time learning Czech names. They're not easy to learn. But we had to learn how to address people properly. Brother and rank. So you must say Brother Sergeant and then the full name. But Brother Sergeant usually had to do because we couldn't remember the names. They were difficult. But anyway, I realised I'm already getting slightly ahead of myself. So we went to Prague. The international crowd gathered, all got on the bus and were taken to base camp. Now, I say the international crowd. They actually do two types of this event. This, by the way, was the 23rd time this event had happened. There are the events run in Czech for Czechs or people who are fluent in Czech. And there are two versions of that. And similarly, there are two versions of the international runs for English speakers or people who are prepared to speak English. And even Czechs taking part in that were told that you must speak English, even if you're both Czech, to each other throughout the whole thing, because it works better that way. So the international runs are also of two types. There's the standard run, which I didn't want to do because I wanted to do the relentless run. Now, the relentless run was more hardcore. It was closer to reenactment perhaps, in that we were in more authentic kit, and they took the gloves off. You had what you were carrying. So if you wanted to stop for the night and sleep, and you were carrying 2 blankets, as I was, one a thin, not very warm one in my pack, and the other one a much better, fluffier one, but that was on the outside of my pack, where it got covered in snow. Well, that's what I had to sleep in. I had one thin blanket and one snow-covered wool blanket, and that was what I slept in. I had my mess tin, my water bottle, and that's what I had to drink, etc. So you carry all the kit, and what you've got is what you've got. No one else is following along in a van with a nice modern sleeping bag or anything like that. So I went in for the hardcore version, and I'm glad I did. Although it was definitely fairly hardcore, as you'll hear. So we got to base camp, and but I'm going to be talking about a couple of themes. One of them is difficulty of fighting in snow. I learned quite a lot of the difficulty of how to fight in snow, and also for me a very big theme was desensitization. We often hear, don't we, that soldiers get desensitized in war, and I found everyone I talked to about this seemed to feel the same, that all these various characters got so desensitized so remarkably quickly, and yet we weren't actually viewing actual horrors of war, but we got desensitized in a way which I'll describe later. Now, we arrived at base camp to be given our kit. We were given our costumes, which were not 100% authentic. They wouldn't impress a really hardcore reenactor, but they were good enough, I would say. They didn't give us absolutely everything. There were some things like gloves and boots that we had to provide ourselves, and puttees. I'll get on to puttees. Puttees are good. I didn't have any puttees. Thank goodness someone lent me some puttees, because puttees are good and they work. So if you take part in this, take puttees. Oh, and a spare spoon. Oh, and some string, and maybe lip balm. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself again. So we were issued kit, which included quite authentic rifles. I feel that they looked a bit like Winchester 1895 pattern ones, but we were told that they represented Mosin Nagants. I didn't see why. I mean, there were actually Winchester 95s in Russia at the time, so they could have called them that. But anyway, they were quite definitely authentic looking, full size, full weight, blank firing rifles. Quite impressive, and they had loads of them. And there were pistols and grenades and sabres, so all the weapons and blankets, greatcoats. We were given greatcoats with the proper insignia for our various units, hats, water bottles, bags of various sorts, mess tins, all that sort of stuff. And a lot of people brought extra scarves as well. I brought this sweater thinking that I better bring a thick wool sweater, because otherwise I'll get really cold. But I tried this on underneath my greatcoat, and I very rapidly overheated. So in fact I ended up not using this sweater at all. So we were given our kit, and then we were given lots of workshops, trained up in how the game was to work. We were given a lecture or two in the history and the background of what was going on. We were taught the rules of the game, which for instance included the term red stop. If someone says red stop, you stop. You stop what you're doing because they are in genuine pain, or they're really not comfortable with the way things are going, or for whatever reason they are insisting that you stop, possibly even drop out of character, back away, whatever. The whole time I never heard anyone use this, but it was there as a sort of a safety word just in case. We were taught a song, which I've forgotten already. But anyway, oh my son, my son. We were actually taught that in Czech. It was the only thing that we were taught in Czech. This was a song that the soldiers did actually sing at the time, and it became a sort of unofficial national anthem almost, a patriotic song. Quite childish dirge really, but in the right context quite moving, and it did get sung a couple of times during the game, I think to quite good effect. And we were all told to write a last letter. And they gave us 6 minutes, and I understand why, because I can understand in previous times they tried this, maybe people spent ages getting it just right, and then they wanted to write 2, and then they wanted to give it to someone who then said, oh no, don't give it to me, don't. And it all took hours, but instead they said, no, you have 6 minutes to write 1 letter to someone that'll be your last letter to be read in the event of your death, and you then give it to someone, and that person takes it without a word. And so we all had last letters, and they did definitely add to the whole experience. That was good. And we acted out scenes. We were given little semi-scripted scenes, not word by word scripted, but we were told what to feel, what to do, and what the point of the scene was. And we acted these out in front of everyone else so that everyone had a little bit of someone else's backstory leading up to the events that were going to be reenacted. And we were also given diaries. Now, this is something which I've never done before in a live action role play. Normally in a role play game, you create your own character, and then within the confines of the setting created by the organizer, you do whatever you want. But with this live action role play, it was more like a drama, more scripted, as I say. This is my diary. It has my character's name on the front of it, which I'm covering that up. Because they did ask me not to put in spoilers. So each of these pages has been painstakingly taped. Can you see little bits of white tape to the next one? And you just, as a scene came to a close, you then broke the seal, turned the page, and looked to see what you would be doing in the next scene. The instructions are often quite vague. Sometimes they're bold and underlined. You can see I have some bold underlined ones there, and those are ones which are compulsory. You must do that thing in that scene, because if you don't, it's going to ruin someone else's plot line. And at the bottom of each page is a little number from 1 to 4, and that's how much you're going to get wounded in the next scene. Now, obviously, if someone runs up to you and hacks at you with a saber and hits you several times, well, you take a wound. But otherwise, if there's a gunshot off in the distance in the general direction of the column, if you've got a number 1, that means it's not going to hit you. And number 2 means probable light wound. Number 3, probable heavy wound. Number 4, oh dear. The system for dealing with wounds was very simple, but it worked fine for the purposes of the event, and that is that you stay wounded until someone treats your wound. And there were loads of characters who played nurses and so forth, and they were taught how to inject someone with morphine, obviously not actually injecting anyone with real morphine, but they had convincing phys-reps of morphine, and they had syringes, and they had a way of making it look as though they were injecting you with morphine. So when you've been treated, you then can get up and move around, and you can act wounded for as long as it remains dramatically interesting. One time I got wounded and I limped heavily on one long section of the march, and it was dramatically very interesting. People wondering whether they should help me or not, one of the officers coming along and ordering me to give my pack to somebody else. And the person who gave me the wound ending up being the person who was helping me along, feeling rather guilty. I went into that scene actually thinking, how am I going to get wounded here? I went scouting ahead on my own because I was brave and I was good at that sort of thing, and I discovered three communists, armed communists in a wood. So I pointed my rifle at them, and I got down and I signalled to the people behind me. And oh, that's fallen down. How annoying. There you go. And I signalled to people what the threat was, and a dozen people came up with rifles and pointed the rifles at them, and the communists just surrendered. The Bolsheviks just put their hands up. So I thought, oh, how am I going to get wounded in this scene then? But later, in that same scene, there was someone who was really, really angry, and he got out a saber and he was waving it around, and I went over to calm him down, say everything was all right, and then he accidentally stabbed me in the thigh. When I say accidentally, I don't just mean that the character accidentally stabbed me in the thigh. I think the person playing the character also genuinely accidentally stabbed me in the thigh, but he gave me a great excuse. Down I went. And it was a dramatic moment, because he immediately went from very angry and literally saber rattling to, oh, I'm sorry. And he put out a hand, and I was in too much pain to say anything, but I just grabbed his hand and gave it a squeeze and sort of, yeah, it's all right, I know, it was accidental sort of a way. And yeah, that was and immediately led to another scene because loads of nurses came over to bandage me up, and then they all started arguing because one of them they felt that one of them wasn't qualified properly and that she should let the more qualified nurses do it. And could you just stop arguing and bandage me up? So lots of drama. And we did that. We did have 2 stretchers with us, but not many people liked having to carry someone on the stretcher for any length of time. So there wasn't a huge amount of carrying actual people on stretchers. But they were still a useful thing, the stretchers, because when we were marching through the countryside, someone had to carry the stretchers, and no one wanted to carry the stretchers because they were big, heavy, awkward things to carry. We were not all playing soldiers, I should make clear. Though a lot of us were soldiers, we were divided into lots of rival units. Some were Slovaks and some were ex-prisoners and so forth. Some were Družina, who were the people who joined right at the start, and they were regarded as a sort of elite. But there were also civilians. So if you're thinking of taking part in this and you think, oh, it's all just about being a soldier and so forth, so there won't be anything for women to do. No, there are loads of women's parts. There are loads of nurses and civilians. There were even a couple of parts for women who had taken up arms and were wearing military uniform and carrying rifles. So there are plenty of things for women to do in this LARP. Anyway, so we were trained up in all the various things that we needed to be trained up in. One of them was bullying. We had a specific workshop on bullying. This was considered very important because bullying was going to be a major part of the game, and they realised that we were all so nice that we might not naturally bully each other, and that even though it might say in our diaries that in the next scene you bully so and so, people might just not really put their hearts into it. So we had a workshop to make sure that we all were good at bullying people, and we were taught how to shove someone around and shove them down to their knees and insult them properly, because otherwise the people's modern niceness might have got in the way of the drama. And then after a bit, we put on our kit and went out into the countryside and tried it out, which was a useful rehearsal. And we were then brought back to base and given an hour to sort ourselves out again. And that's where a number of adjustments were made. For instance, my trousers, though I had been very active in them, had frozen solid. And someone at that point lent me some puttees. Thank you. Thank you. Puttees are good. If you're doing this, take puttees. Or maybe very good gaiters if you've got some period appropriate ones. But puttees are simple and they work and they're authentic. So puttees. Anyway, yeah, so when you're shoving someone, again, modern people are nice, but then sometimes might get carried away. So you don't want out of niceness for them to not actually do any shoving or just sort of prod with the fingers. That's no good. That looks rubbish. But you don't want them violently actually shoving each other, because that's the way that someone gets hurt or gets genuinely angry. So you slam your hands on them and make it look good, and then you give them a little bit of a shove, and then it's up to them how far back they go. So if they think, I'm going to interpret this as a really heavy shove and I'm going to go flying backwards, that's them. They have decided to throw themselves backwards, and then it looks right, looks dramatic, doesn't break the immersion, if you like, but no one gets, all going well, actually hurt. And we tried out lots of different types of fighting. We were told how to shoot the rifles, how to shoot the pistols. The pistols are really loud, really amazingly loud. And as soon as I just fired one, every single time, every single round, beep, tinnitus, every single time. We weren't wearing ear defenders. Those were pretty substantial blank rounds in the pistols. We did saber fighting. I didn't actually have a saber. I just had a long knife. And I won the saber fight. We had 2 all against all bouts, and I won the second one, and I sort of won the first one in that I was the last man standing, but I'd been hit in both arms. But I was the last man standing. We did wrestling and slapping, how to slap someone properly, making it look good. Brawling, which was another style of fighting. I came second in the wrestling. And the guy won. I reckon he cheated. He used his leg. He hooked with his leg. He wasn't supposed to do that. Anyway, so we were taught how to fight, and those playing nurses were taught how to bandage a wound up and so forth, and make it look good. They were all given bottles of quite realistic looking fake blood, and I tell you, it looks so much better in snow, so much better, God, how a grim thing to say, but so much more dramatic in snow, because if someone is writhing in agony and people are holding them down and they're trying to bandage stuff up and they're getting out the morphine and what have you, and then when they bring them to their feet, you see a splatter of realistic looking blood in the snow. Ooh, wow, yeah, that looks pretty dramatic. Yeah, so we tried out our kit. We tried out a mock battle, and one problem I discovered during the mock battle is that some of the weapons didn't work terribly well. The rifles very often didn't go bang. Now, of course, that's dramatic. You know, you sneak into a position, I've got him in my sights, and click, click. But they went click an awful lot. The trouble was that the cold was affecting them. It wasn't the ammunition. Keeping the ammunition warm didn't seem to help at all. But when they got cold, the parts contracted and the firing pins didn't perhaps quite reach. I found a couple of things I could do to make it more likely to make my rifle go bang, but it was a bit of a frustration that it was so cold that the rifles didn't go reliably bang. And we had grenades as well. The grenades were hollow light cardboard tubes with a quite powerful banger in, and you lit them. And yeah, that's pretty good that they had grenades. But there were a couple of problems with the grenades. One was that the lighters so often just, I don't know, it was very cold or something. For some reason, the lighters just, come on, didn't want to work a lot of the time. Another thing is that because of it, they couldn't, for safety reasons, have people throwing genuinely heavy lumps of metal at each other. They were just light cardboard tubes. And since almost all the fighting took place in wintry woods, where there are an awful lot of springy twigs hanging about the place, this was not a happy combination. So you saw someone just there, you lit your grenade and you threw it, and ha-ha, it hit a twig and bounced back. And you were not allowed to pick up a grenade that someone had thrown at you to throw it back. Again, safety reasons, because it's only a banger, but it's very loud, and you wouldn't want it to go bang next to your ear as you're trying to throw it back. But anyway, grenades. So we had grenades and sabers and rifles and pistols. Those were the weapons, and so we were taught how to use all those. And then off we went. I think it's time for the sponsor's message. Now, the sponsor is the Great Courses Plus. So, what's the Great Courses? What's the Great Courses Plus? Don't you watch my videos? They've been sponsoring me for ages. Well, the Great Courses Plus is a big website which has on it lots and lots of video lectures on all sorts of topics. How to do stuff like cooking and photography, travel, places around the world, and of more interest to me, history. Although actually I've been watching some of the biology lectures and I quite like those as well. Now, in order to understand an event like the March of the Czech Legions at the end of World War I, you've got to understand the broader context. What on earth led to this? Why was there a revolution in Russia? Why were other countries interested in there either being or not being a revolution in Russia? What were the conditions that made this revolution possible? So in order to understand what's happening at this point in time, you really need to step back a bit. So sometimes a lecture series like one that I noticed, which is The Long 19th Century, which is a series of lectures by Robert Wiener, Professor Robert Wiener, I should say, distinguished, august Professor Robert Wiener, it steps back. Now, the dates that he picked are 1789 to 1917. And the reasons that he's gone with that is that's the French Revolution, or rather I should say one of the French revolutions, but when people refer to the French Revolution, they normally mean the 1789 one, and the Russian Revolution. And again, there were actually, of course, lots of Russian revolutions, but the biggie was the 1917 one. And so he's picked those start and end dates for his lecture course, and he deals with the themes that run through this period: growing industrialization, the rise of socialism, the rise of national identities and unifying nations like Italy, the rise of Germany, and imperialism. And of course these culminate in World War I, which is when the events that I was reenacting dramatically took place. And this is just one of something like 11,000 lectures that you could have a look at. And the great thing about this is there are no exams. You're watching these because you're just interested. And if you're interested in this sort of thing, well, you could watch this or any of the other 11,000 lectures for free, because if you go to www.thegreatcoursesplus.com/Lindybeige, or always much easier. Just click the link in the description below. Then you can get a free trial period and watch loads of lectures. And if you don't like it, well, then you can just watch the ones that you think are most interesting and then just walk away. Or you can then pay to subscribe to be able to watch loads more. Of course, eventually you're going to end up having to pay something. You can't expect something of this quality to be free. That would be ridiculous. Now, so that's the Great Courses Plus. Now, getting back to what I was talking about, this live action role play event. So I'd gone to the event, I'd been trained up, we tried out the kit, and eventually the game, you could call it a game, the dramatic reenactment, the whatever it was, the LARP, it started. And this involved marching, an awful lot of marching. Well, I say marching, we weren't marching formally in step, walking, trudging, yes. I think we probably did trudging more than anything else. And it was very snowy, which it usually is when they stage this, and the snow makes a huge difference. For a start, everything looks pretty in its way, but it makes things difficult. Now, that walking in snow is more difficult than walking in dry conditions is fairly obvious, but there are many kinds of snow, and in Britain we're not terribly familiar with all of them. You see, we do get snow in Britain, of course, but in Britain we associate snow with two main things, I would say. One is transport difficulties. You have to make some long journey, but your bus or your train or whatever gets delayed because of snow. And this only happens every couple of years, but every time we get surprised. Because, you see, we don't devote many resources to coping with large snowfall because we know that it's only going to happen once for every couple of years for just a couple of days. So what's the point? Well, for a couple of days, every couple of years, the whole country grinds to a halt. But in places where snow is a lot more predictable, they of course cope with it a lot better. They have snow tyres. A lot of Europeans are amazed that the British don't put snow tyres on it. We don't put snow tyres on. No one has a separate set of tyres for snow, not in Britain. Well, maybe in some parts of Scotland, but I've never heard of it in England. Anyway, there are lots of types of snow. Sorry, I digressed a bit. And some of them are challenging to walk through or over for various reasons. Like there's one type where it's quite deep snow, but the sun has come out and just melted it a little bit, but then the sun has gone in and it's turned into ice, and this has happened a number of times, and a crust has formed. And the crust is perhaps this thick. It's thick enough to support your weight, so you can actually move across the top of it. As I had to once at speed, and my sergeant was behind me saying, "Come on, speed up, faster, 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 come on, get move on." And I was taking lots and lots of very short strides, going as fast as I could, because I could feel I had almost no tread on my boots, I should say. The tread had worn almost completely off my boots. I could feel if I lengthened my stride at all, I would surely slip over. Now you can, of course, bound across this snow, in which case one of two things are likely to happen. You will either go "Wah!" and slip because you've too obvious. Or the other one is that you will then hit the crust with so much force that you'll manage to crunch all the way through it, and then you'll come to also a very abrupt and uncomfortable stop. So there I was going very fast, but my sergeant was yelling at me, so I thought, okay, well maybe he knows something I don't, or maybe I'm just terrified of my sergeant, I don't know. So I did experiment by lengthening my stride just very, very, very slightly, even though I felt that I was right at the maximum of my stride length, which it turns out I was. And I went, yes, bam! And even now my neck still hurts a bit. I was wearing a pack on my lower back. It sat quite low on me, so there's nothing to support my head, which snapped back, and ow, frankly ow. So there's that sort of snow. But there's another sort which is similar, but the crust is so thin that you just crunch straight through it. That's all right, actually, I didn't mind that. Although all this ice crystal crust has quite a powerful scouring effect on boots. I was wearing for much of the time these boots, which I'd been wearing for years. And despite they'd already seen quite a lot of action, they were that colour, this was dark chestnut. And yet, look, the top surface has just been scoured away by this ice crystally snow. So that was one drawback of that. I did a lot of, the front I think has been scoured away because I did a lot of kicking steps into the snow as I was going up hills. But the worst one is not when it's a thin crust, which you go straight through, or a thick crust, which can support you. It's the middling crust, which sometimes is strong enough to support you, but sometimes not. So you take a step forward and you go down to your knee through it, and then you take another step forward and it holds, and so you whoosh down and bring yourself up, and then you take another step forward and it supports you again, and another one, and shumph, down again, and that is exhausting. Very often I was right at the front of the column, and when you're the first person walking through that sort of snow, that is really exhausting to go through. The deepest snow was about hip height, but we never went through that. We just walked around it. There's no point. Some stuff, the deepest that we actually walked through was about knee height. And if it's the thin, powdery stuff without a crust, that was fine. You just wade through it. That didn't bother me at all. Perhaps the one that bothered me personally the most, though it didn't seem to bother other people nearly so much, was when you're walking on a path that's sloping downhill. Uphill I didn't have trouble with, but downhill, and the path has been wet and has then frozen, so you've got ice immediately over the hard surface of the path, and then that's been snowed on with just a little bit of snow, about this much, and so you've got snow over the top of ice and you're walking downhill, and I had no grip on my boots. So whereas a lot of the time I was near the front of the column and people were saying to me, slow down, you're going too fast, let us catch up, you're going too fast, slow down. When I was, a couple of times, I found myself at the back of the column being helped along like a little old lady, because I had no grip on that sort of snow. Downhill at that angle on that particular kind of snow, whoa, I was skidding all over the shop. There were some pretty hair-raising paths that we went on. One in particular, where there was a cliff going up to our right, and to the left a very, very steep drop, and sometimes it was quite a long drop as well, maybe 100 or 200 feet, down to a river. And you'd have been in deep trouble if you'd fallen down that. And we were doing this at night. And every now and then, on the path, which is mostly about that wide, there would be a hazard, perhaps a 45-degree sideways slope there covered completely with ice. And if you took a really long stride, maybe you could get to the other side of it in one, but there's nothing to hang on to. Or someone will perhaps help you and hold out a hand, and then you could perhaps, if you've got a rifle, you could use that as a stick to get across. And whew, that was a bit hair-raising. Only on this path there were dozens of bits like that, and there were 60 of us in the column. Now, think about this in a role-play game. Imagine you're the referee of a role-play game, and you think, well, you come to a hazard, there's a risk of something going wrong here. I want to make it not too difficult, but okay, roll more than 8. That doesn't seem high. And with your bonuses and so forth for high decks and being just ace, maybe you only have to roll a 5, so it's a very easy roll on a d20. Wait a minute, there were 60 of us, and there were dozens of these points. All right, what if you just said, okay, anything but a 1, that's a 5% chance of something going really badly wrong. Okay, if 60 people have to roll anything but a 1 over a few dozen of these places, hardly anyone's going to make it to the end of the path. And yet, we all did. Some of us, I know, from looking at the state of them at the end, had a pretty tough time. Yeah, it was definitely quite a challenge. And yet, it shows you that something extremely dangerous causes no harm if people are sensible and take care. It's really difficult to assess what is the actual danger that we were in on that path. I don't know. Everyone was fine, and this was the 23rd time they'd done this, so presumably in the past everyone has been fine as well. Otherwise they would have changed the plan a bit, wouldn't they? So there you go. It was sort of dangerous and sort of not dangerous. We were all fine, although somewhat tired and saying to each other afterwards, whew, blimey, did you see that bit with the blimey? Yeah. So there was yes, snow. I was talking about snow, wasn't I? A lot of the time it was actually snowing, which presented more hazards. One being that the snow was constantly going in the end of my rifle. I was constantly blowing, trying to clear snow out of the barrel of my rifle. I imagine, because when you march, you generally have the barrel pointing upwards, so that you've got the whole of the barrel pointing into the sky. I imagine they must have had something, I don't know, a piece of cork or something to stop fouling the barrel. When you're crawling along the ground, trying to crawl and not foul the barrel, I found really difficult. Now, of course, because we weren't actually firing any projectiles out of the barrels, it didn't really matter that much if you did foul the barrel, but I was trying not to foul the barrel and finding it really difficult and having to clear it again and again and again of snow. So that's a genuine difficulty of doing stuff in snow. Dropping things. Dropping things is such a hazard in snow. I lost my spoon. My spoon! Don't lose your spoon. In fact, I would advise take a spare spoon. Spoons are very useful. Forget about knives and forks, you don't need them and they probably won't let you on the plane with them anyway, but a spoon, vital. Don't lose your spoon. As I did, I had my spoon, my mess tin, which I was keeping in a bag here, so it was quick deployment because you need to be able to get to your spoon and your mess tin quickly because food might turn up and you need it now. You don't want to be delayed, you want to get into the queue. It might be hot, but it won't be hot for very long because it's snowing. Oh yeah, and the guy in front of you who starts asking questions when the big urn, which has got the hot food in, is actually being snowed in. The snow is falling into the thing and he starts asking, oh, is there any gluten in it? Just it's being snowing in it. Did you cook this yourself? I don't care. Yes, sorry, but yeah, it also makes you hurry up when you're serving food. Oh yeah, and eat your bread quickly. Eat your bread quickly. Don't forget about whether putting something on the bread. Just eat it before it freezes. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, dropping things. So there I was, and I walked around, I had a few people to talk to, and then my spoon was gone. But I knew where I was. I just walked from there to there. So it was on the ground somewhere, but it had just gone into the snow and disappeared, and I never saw that spoon again. Some Czech farmer in the season to come will discover a spoon. And considerably more potentially expensive was when I decided at one point during the LARP that someone's mental state was probably incompatible with ownership of a loaded pistol, and I took the pistol off him, but I didn't have a holster, so I just tucked it into my belt. But then we got attacked. A load of Bolsheviks attacked, so I had to rush off because I was a rifleman. I was supposed to protect the column, and we fought off the Bolsheviks, and I went over to search them. One of the reasons you search them is that they might have ammunition on them, which was vital. I started the game with 3 rounds of ammunition. I actually ended up with much more than I started with, thanks to various bargains I struck and looting bodies as well. Anyway, so you bend over and I search through the pockets. I find some rounds, terrific. Put them in my pocket, and I stand up, and now as you stand up, of course, bits of snow fall off you. And I saw that one bit of snow, I don't know, for some reason it was suspicious. There's something that hit the ground, but I looked and I saw nothing. And there was this tiny little mark in the snow, but I thought, no, there was something wrong about that. It sounded too, I don't know, heavy. It sounded wrong. So I bent down and found in the snow, the other side of this tiny little hole that gave no indication that something as large as a pistol had gone through it, was this very doubtless expensive blank firing pistol. And so yeah, it's a good job I didn't realise later that I'd dropped the pistol, because if I'd tried to go back for it, I never would have found it. Not even. I could have searched for hours, never would have found it. Anyway, so there it was, this snow-covered pistol. Phew! Thank goodness I bothered to check. So dropping stuff, and even things as large as a rifle. One of my comrades got wounded. I rushed over to my comrade. Where are you hit? Where are you hit? Medic! And I'm trying to staunch the flow of the blood and get some medics to come up. But there was still a fight going on. So I then tried to pick my comrade up. I did not pick my comrade up. Not actually completely, because trying to pick up another human in snow when you're tired, it's next to impossible. When you read accounts of troops getting medals for having done this under fire, and you realise, oh yeah, I actually understand. Trying to pick up a whole person with all that person's kit, pack, rifle, and so forth, and don't forget your own rifle. Anyway, so gone through all this rigmarole, someone comes over, patches up my comrade, and okay, where's my rifle? There wasn't a convenient tree to lean my rifle against, so I just dropped it on the ground. I was in a hurry. And some people had come over and people had trodden about and the snow had gone everywhere and my rifle had disappeared. I dug around and I found my rifle. Didn't take long, but yes, even something as big as a rifle can just disappear in snow. Falling over. Falling over is something, I didn't do a huge amount of falling over, but I think everyone fell over at some point. I did a few times fall over. For one example, this was quite near the end of the game and the column got ambushed and there were some people, some Reds or Bolsheviks, I don't know, dark shapes, and they were shooting at us. They were probably Bolsheviks, but who cares? They're attacking the column. I'm a rifleman, supposed to protect it. So I ran to the back of the column. I already had a round in the spout. Stood, took aim, bang, got off a round, but then I thought, I'm not going to stand here and try to fiddle another round into the breach. I'm just going to turn and go. So I turned to my right and took one step and fell over the other rifleman who had, whilst I was aiming, and unbeknownst to me, had come up behind me and a little to my right and had knelt to shoot. I fell straight over him. Everyone else is running past. all I've got to do is get back up. I've fallen over, I just need to get back up. I'm wearing a pack, I'm carrying a rifle and trying not to foul the barrel of the rifle, and the snow is about this deep. It takes ages to get back to your feet. And when there are people with sabres running towards you at high speed, every extra second it takes to get back on your feet feels like an absolute age. I was amazed. I was frankly amazed at how long. Also, I was not perhaps in my peak of physical fitness at this point. How long it took me to get back to my feet. So yes, it's not the falling over so much as the how long it takes you to get back on your feet. So dropping and wool. Just like to say, the wool really works. Wool keeps you warm even when it's wet. And greatcoats. A greatcoat, it's just one blanket thick layer of wool, and yet they really work. And as long as you're reasonably active, you don't get cold in them. I've been told that guards outside Buckingham Palace wearing greatcoats are sometimes invited in by the Queen if they're officers. They get invited in by the Queen for a cup of tea because she knows how bored they must get standing around all day guarding the place, and perhaps sometimes she's bored. So it's a polite thing to do. The Queen asks them in for a cup of tea, and they stand there and keep their greatcoat on, which may seem rather odd, but they're not wearing their uniform underneath the greatcoat. And if they take the greatcoat off, they will reveal a Mickey Mouse T-shirt or something of the kind. So they in the presence of the Queen, thank you very much for for the cup of tea. They keep their greatcoats on. Anyway, they're warm. They really do work. And as I say, you have to keep reasonably active. So that's why a lot of sentries you'll see on guard duty have these ceremonial step forward, stamp, stamp, turn to the right, stampy, stampy, stamp that way, and turn round, and stampy, stampy, stamp back that way, and more stampy, stampy, stamp. It's because it's just one way of making sure that you don't get too cold. If you're in a greatcoat, yeah, you can stay impressively warm. And the gloves, I was wearing these gloves. These are sheepskin gloves. Some people had big mitts on. With these gloves, I could operate the trigger and the hammer on my rifle, but I couldn't. The main thing I could not do when I was wearing my gloves is get small things out of pockets and pouches, small things like bullets. So in the middle of a combat, you can imagine that's pretty important to be able to get hold of something like a bullet. So there I would be with my gloves on, holding the rifle, and I would then have to get my glove off and then fiddle around and find a round and then put that into the breech and aim and fire, and now I could put my glove back on again, but no, immediately I might want to load another one, eject the previous one, and then, oh, we're moving, okay, we're in a hurry, there's people over there, we're being shot at. So I'm just holding my glove with just a finger or two like that, and you're running at night through a wood in snow. It is so easy to lose a glove. And I'm very glad that I didn't. When I held on to my gloves with just one finger or whatever against my rifle, I did so with a great deal of force. I was determined not to lose a glove, and I'm very glad I didn't. Not just because these are very nice gloves, but also because it would have been a pretty miserable experience missing a glove. After a while, I got in the habit of having a couple of bullets actually in the fingers of the gloves, which sped things up a little bit. I also thought it might warm the ammunition up, but that didn't seem to help. But then I forgot about them, and when I got back, I noticed that I still had 2 unfired blank rounds in the gloves, which had twice gone through airport security. Whoops! There was a strange moment in airport security when they said, is this your coat, sir? And because they'd found something suspicious. It was my house keys. They found my house keys suspicious, but not 2 rounds of unfired ammunition. Anyway, whoops. And oh, my hands were so clean. I've never known my hands so clean. They were pink and super clean because those sheepskin gloves became sopping wet. They took days to dry out. And were constantly rubbing against my hands and being taken off and put back on, taken off and put back on. My hands were, I've never known my hands so clean. And they work, even though they were sopping wet, because they're wool or sheepskin, they work. So that's one thing I can attest. Wool flipping well works. Puttees work. Puttees are good. Take puttees. And greatcoats work. And I never got really dangerously cold. Over and over again, we were crawling around in the snow, getting down because we were under gunfire. and then you'd get up again, you'd be covered in snow, and you'd try to knock some of it off, but after a while you're getting snow on you and knocking it off, and after a while you just accept you're going to have a certain amount of snow on you. But one problem was the pack problem. You've got a pack and there's a halt. The pack's heavy, it's cutting into your shoulders a bit, you quite like to put it down. Perhaps an officer suggests that, right, everyone take your packs off. Do you take it off and put it down on its back? In which case, if it's snowing, the snow will land on the other side of your pack, so that when you put the pack on, the snow will be between your pack and you, and that'll melt. And no, you don't want that. Yes, you can knock 90% of it off, but then whatever's there, it will melt, and then you'll have a wet back. And okay, so you put it the other way up, but then that means when you take it off the snow from the ground will be on the same, and you've got the same problem. You can cover it with, you can bother to stop, take it, open it, take out a cover, put it down, put a cover over it, but then that's faff, and then the cover gets covered in snow, and then you're putting the cover that's covered in snow in it, and then that all melts. And I never found a simple answer to any of these things, but the snow gets everywhere, and despite our best intentions, of course, we were not veterans at it. Presumably, if you did this day in, day out for years, as the people who actually did the real event did, you got much better at this. But we found that despite whatever your best intentions and best plans at the start, everything ends up getting wet. And then, of course, after getting wet, it then freezes and then becomes stiff and wet. So trying to open my cloth bag became harder and harder, and eventually I actually snapped the toggle on it because it was so stiff. Just trying to get a mess tin or my diary out. So yeah, everything freezes. And then there's the dilemma. Someone makes a fire. Several times someone made a fire. So you think, okay, do I stand next to this fire and get a little bit warm, but it's not going to be for very long, and then what's presented to this fire will then melt, and then as soon as I walk away, it's then all going to turn to ice. At the moment, it's frost and snow that's sort of on me and not actually bothering me that much. But if it melts into my coat and then freezes to ice, then it's going to bother me a lot more. Maybe I'll just not stand next to the fire. Maybe getting warm just isn't worth it. Darkness. We were fighting at night most of the time. Most of the fights were at night. And you're firing at dark shapes. You can't recognize exactly whom you're shooting at. It's just some guy and they're firing at us, so we'll fire back. A number of times we didn't know if they were reds or whites or even more of our own chaps. They were just shapes out there. You cannot recognize the enemy, and you can't recognize friends either. Everyone reported this. They would go round and round and round. We'd be at a stop. I want to talk to so-and-so. They'd go round, and I know what this person looks like. I know what they're wearing, and you can't find them. You cannot recognize people in the dark. And more than once, I ended up amongst the wrong unit. And my sergeant would be yelling for me, and I think, hang on, you're not my sergeant. Are you? Are you my sergeant? Yeah, recognizing people in the dark. Do not form any plan that involves being able to recognize an individual in the dark. On the other hand, it was amazing that we were able to do what we did at all, because in Britain, when there's no snow on the ground and it's dark and moonless, if you're in the woods, it's pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of your face. It's absolutely pitch black. Now, admittedly, this was winter, so there were no leaves, there was no canopy, and there were reasonably clear skies, so there was starlight, but there was no moon. And more than once, I was looking up into the sky trying to find the moon. Where is this light coming from? What is this light that's a new light? And there was no moon in the sky. And yet, when it's snowy, you can see amazingly well. So just by starlight alone, we could navigate right the way through woods even at night. Now, some people did have lanterns, but they just night blinded you. They weren't really that useful, the lanterns. And after a while, people just stopped lighting them. They preferred to go without the lanterns. So darkness was a factor. Snow was a major factor, which changed a lot of things. Sneaking around. Do not. In most types of snow, and particularly the crunchy snow with the crust, which you have to crash through, you cannot be stealthy. You have two modes of movement. Being completely still, in which case you can be quite quiet, or crashing around. And those were the two modes of movements in that type of snow. It doesn't matter how stealthy you were, you can only just crash around. One thing I found as well, this annoyed me. People were constantly saying, don't leave a gap, move up there, close the gap in the column. And I was constantly trying to leave a gap between me and the person in front, because when a column is really, really close together and you're walking through snow, It only takes one person to stumble for a bit and hang on, could you just help me out? Wait, okay, what have I dropped? What have I dropped? And that causes the person behind them to stop, and then that means the person behind and the person behind and the person behind, and the stoppage goes the whole length of the column, and even the guy right at the back has to come to a complete halt and then wait. And because people were stumbling and dropping stuff and having to stop for any one of 1,000 reasons over and over again, stop and start and stop and start. So I kept trying to open a gap, and I started counting the number of times that I walked up to the person in front who was stopped, who would then start walking just before I got to him, and so I was able to carry on going because of my opening up the gap. So yeah, obviously it does mean that the column becomes much longer, which could be a danger, I suppose, if you're going to be ambushed, but I think it was more comfortable, less tiring, and just better to have a bit of a gap. But we were forced into single file quite a lot, so yeah, there were some inconveniences. Now, so I've talked about the snow, I've talked about the cold, everything, your priorities shift when it's cold. And that, I'm going to get into the desensitization in a moment, but before that, I'm going to get on to the emotion of this, because it's an immersive experience. And I've been told before that one of the reasons that this was such an immersive and emotional experience, which is why it was recommended. I was told about this after I took part in the Fairweather Manor LARP, which I've made another video about here, which you can go and watch that one. That was another brilliant one. That was set by coincidence at the same time, at the end of World War One. Only that was based on Downton Abbey rather than a specific historical event. I was told that this was so immersive and so emotional because you are so cold and you are so tired. And maybe that was a factor. But even so, when terrible things were happening to my character, and so I felt in order to act out the dramatic scene that was required of me, I should put some oomph into it. And I was, acting being really upset. Several times I was like doing proper sobbing, and I was thinking, wow, am I a really good actor? Where are these tears coming from? Am I actually this good? I don't know. Maybe the cold and the tiredness did get me, the immersion, I don't know. Or maybe I am just that fine an actor. But I found it very easy to be quite dramatic, and I hope reasonably realistic. But then again, some really dark things were happening to my character. We'll get on to the desensitization. Okay, so you hear about this, don't you? People say that, once soldiers have seen so much horror in war, they become desensitized to it. Now, we of course hadn't seen it. We hadn't seen anyone actually die, and we'd only been doing this for 2 days. So just how desensitized could we get? Well, it seems pretty desensitized. I'll give you a couple of examples. I was coming back from the loo, and I was a little bit worried that someone might have nabbed I had one of the better sleeping places in the night stop place where we'd stopped, and I thought, someone might nab it from me, and has someone taken my water bottle? Someone had. And I had concerns like that, and would they nick one of my blankets, and could I possibly nick someone else's blanket? And I was thinking soldierly thoughts like those. And when I noticed that there was someone lying apparently dead over there, but they were being attended to by several other people, and someone's dead, looks like it's one of the nurses. But I wasn't really that bothered. It didn't affect me directly. There were several other nurses. Didn't matter. So I was just about to walk straight in, but then I had a bit of a meta thought. I had a thought, well, maybe I'm going to miss out on some of the plot lines of this story if I don't take part in this sort of thing. But I can't just walk over there for no reason. But then I was able to rationalise it to myself. I was able to say, well, people gawp at car crashes, don't they? You're driving along the motorway, everything slows down, then you go past this great wrecked car and you go, oh, wow, look how wrecked that is. Anyway, I wonder what's on the radio, and you get straight back to driving along the motorway. You're sort of desensitised to it. It doesn't involve you. So I thought, well, people gawp at car crashes. I could just go and gawp. There's a perfectly good explanation for why my character might go over there. So I walked over there, and she was lying on the back, and I was seeing her at this sort of angle. I didn't recognise her face. Nurse's uniform, well, there are loads of people in nurse's uniform, but then I saw her scarf. I recognised her scarf. I knew who that was. That was someone I'd been talking to only half an hour before, and she seemed so happy, and it was someone I knew, and someone my character really cared about. And my goodness, I went from totally insensitive, not caring a fig, to overwhelmed by grief in 3 seconds. Or I should say, my character was overwhelmed by grief, and yet I think I was able to pretty convincingly play being overwhelmed by grief. And there were several scenes that followed that where I dealt with the person responsible. But again, can't give away any details because, well, you understand, don't want to spoil the plot for someone. So that you could say was as an example of desensitization, but perhaps a better one is another time when my character was trying to get someone else to do something during one of the parades in front of everyone. When all the men were mustered, ready to march, I could get this person to do a certain thing in front of everyone, and then everyone would see this, and then everyone would know, and this was really important to me. And I was thinking, all sorts of things could go wrong. Maybe he won't do it. Maybe he will do it, but then everyone will just laugh. Or maybe they'll be so shocked and outraged that they'll kill him on the spot, and I don't want that to happen. Or maybe he'll wheedle out of it somehow. I'd gone through all sorts of possibilities of things that could go wrong in my head. Anyway, he did the thing. And everybody saw. I thought, mission accomplished. Everyone has seen it. Now everyone will know. And this is really important. And no one attacked him. No one did anything. The reaction was, right, yeah, fine. It's cold. Come on, can we get on? And they all just disappeared, got their packs on because they were, come on, we're getting cold, and they wanted to go. I and my character both had predicted all sorts of possible outcomes, but had missed this one, perhaps the most obvious to someone who'd been perhaps a bit more experienced in this context. The possibility that no one would care. They're cold and they want to move on, and there was nothing they had to do. Yeah, this guy's like that. Okay, so now we know. Whatever, let's go. And everyone just walked away, and there I was on my own, and my character turned away and had a bit of a private moment. No one cared. Everyone, the entire crowd didn't care about this really quite important thing. Nobody cared. So the entire group was to a degree desensitized. There were so many things that we had to put up with. And there's so many things where your priority, because of the cold, there you are in line to be served, waiting there with your mess tin being snowed on. And is a fight starting over there? It's 100 yards away. You can see a couple of people fighting. Are they 2 of ours? You don't want to lose your place in the queue, though. So you don't. And even though you're taking part in this game and you realise that fight over there is possibly an important plot line, you don't lose your place in the queue, and you're tired and you're cold. So even though we weren't actually witnessing genuine horrors, we were amazingly rapidly, by the situation, desensitized. And I found that quite an education. Now, some people have said to me, was it fun? Did you have fun then? No, I wouldn't say I had fun. Fun's not the word I would use to describe this. If what you want is fun, yeah, pick something else. But I can say very good things about it. It was very interesting. It was challenging. It was certainly memorable, and it was definitely satisfying. And those are all really good things, and I'm very glad that I took part. Would I do it again? I won't rule it out, but I have to say, surprised that some people were there for their 3rd and even 4th time. It's quite a grueling experience to go through. When I got back to Prague, I met someone in town, and we went to a place to have a beer and some food, and we were talking. We talked for about 2 hours, but I was fighting to keep my eyes open, and I went back to the hotel, and I got one step inside the door, just dropped my bag, dropped my coat, walked step to the bed, fell face forward, boom, onto the bed, and 4.5 hours later, in a room with all the lights blazing, I woke up in exactly the same position, quite uncomfortable. My boots were dangling off on my feet off the edge of the bed. It's a very, I don't know if I've ever been quite so done in, but if I have, it was a very long time ago.